Hello and welcome to Better Boundaries Online, everyone. Today we have an incredibly brave and important conversation ahead as part of Porn Education Awareness Week, a time dedicated to shedding light on the often hidden realities of the adult film industry and its connections and exploitation and trafficking. I am honoured to welcome Jewell Baraka, a survivor, advocate, and author of the powerful memoir Coming of Age on a Porn Set, Trafficked in Porn at 14. In her book, Jewell courageously shares her story of being trafficked into the hardcore porn industry as a teenager and her inspiring journey of fighting back to reclaim her life and her voice. Jewell, thank you so much for joining us today and for your willingness to speak out on these difficult topics. Your advocacy work helps educate and protect young people by revealing the truths that are so often glossed over. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to get to bring awareness to these issues. So thank you.
Thank you. So please, Jewell, can you share how you were trafficked into prostitution and later into the adult film industry as a young teenager, and what made you so vulnerable at that time?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about the vulnerabilities that make trafficking possible in our lives. Sometimes that's substance use or struggles to remain housed, or being in foster care. But for me, my vulnerability was being born into my family of origin. So I was trafficked by my father at 11 into prostitution, and then at 14 into hardcore porn. And so so my father, he looked like the guy next door because he was a community leader, a religious leader, but also likely a clinical psychopath. Yeah. And so he had abused me since I was 5. I don't really know the backstory between how he ended up trafficking me at 11. Obviously there's money involved, but possibly some blackmail too, since he was a religious leader. I'm not sure exactly how that came about, but he trafficked me when I was 11. And then I was trafficked at an underage brothel that focused on young girls. And so at 14, I was looking a little too old for that. And so they started basically shopping around for where they would put me next. And because my dad was a psychopath and kind of twisted in his abuse of me, I was unfortunately a good fit for the hardcore porn industry. And so that's how I got trafficked into porn at 14.
That's a deep story. And how prevalent do you believe child and teen trafficking is in the adult entertainment world?
Well, it's hard to know the scope of it because I always say there's a million corners of the porn industry. And I just knew my corner. I definitely think it's more prominent than we're speaking about now. What we tend to speak about most in the child and teen area now is what we call CSAM, child sexual abuse material, which could range from, just a parent or sibling or somebody filming somebody and then putting it online. That's considered child sexual abuse material. So not all child sexual abuse material happens in the porn industry. Definitely on the set I was trafficked on, there were other young people like me. It was mostly an adult set, but there were other young people like me. So it's hard to, I guess, get a big picture view of the porn industry overall. But definitely it's happening more than we're currently speaking about.
And what levels of physical or emotional violence did you encounter or witness on porn sets?
So I was trafficked on what I always define as an adult hardcore porn set. Hardcore meaning that all the sex and violence is actual and that it tends towards a more graphic or extreme nature. So on my set, the working adult film hardcore set that I was trafficked on, there was a high level of violence, both physical and sexual. Yeah, I mean, it would definitely be called abusive. Sometimes it would probably cross into that category that it could be defined as torture.
Yeah. So you couldn't get out. You were taken there every day or every other day, or?
Yeah, so the way it worked in my life is I was trafficked at night. So basically my father would take me out of my bed and put me in the car with 2 men who would take me for the first 3 years to the underage brothel, for the last 3 years to the hardcore porn studio. So I was being trafficked at night. I still had a whole day life. I went to school. played piano, did sports, but at night I was being trafficked. And just to clarify, like I always call my dad my trafficker because he was receiving money for me, but he didn't actually go with me to either the underage brothel or the studio.
Right. So you were kind of living two lives.
Absolutely.
Wow. And were the pressures like threats and normalization of abuse that made you feel like you couldn't get out of it?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, that starts with my father. He was controlling my whole life, and he was a master at crafting his own image. So I never had any doubt that if I spoke my story, I wouldn't be believed, right? Because he had crafted his image so well as a good guy, the guy next door, religious man. Um, and I remember when I was in junior high and this was all starting to escalate, I had a couple friends who accused their father of sexual abuse, and nobody around me believed them. And he was like a drunk, known to be a drunk in town. And so I just knew, looking at that I didn't have a chance of being believed. And so that's the main thing that like kept me locked in place. I mean, as it got worse and worse, I began looking for ways out. I've always been kind of a researcher. And so when I was 15, I had a speech class and I did all this research on runaways. And what I found out is that I would be running towards what I was running away from. And so that kind of shut off that avenue of escape. Yeah. And then, but I never stopped looking for a way out. I guess suicide became the next avenue, which I did try to kill myself when I was 17, when the violence was getting really extreme. I think it was a way to take control. It's like, I'm going to kill myself before they can kill me. But, and eventually we'll get to that later, but eventually I did find a way out, obviously, because I'm here today. So, spoiler alert. Yeah. And spoiler alert for those of you who do end up reading my story, it can be hard to get through in times, but you know the end of the story. I'm here, I made it out, I'm living and advocating for others now.
So let's talk a little bit about the industry and what you saw. And was there much drug use on sets? Like drug and alcohol use to get through? Were you given things like that to be able to cope? And also, did you see guys using erectile drugs, that kind of thing?
So I was kind of lost in my own trauma. There was, so I don't really know the personal lives of other people on set. There was definitely alcohol on set. They gave me alcohol nightly, whiskey usually. So I assumed there was drug use too, but I wasn't really talking to other people on set. I was just kind of lost in my own trauma. And as far as like erectile drugs and that kind of thing, I would, if you want the big picture view, I would definitely recommend Exodus Cry's Beyond Fantasy series on the porn industry. Unsafe sex addresses that issue really well. And of course, my favorite episode is Hardcore. I mean, it's a hard episode to watch, but it addresses the harms that are happening to people and the humans in porn, as I always say it. We often call them performers, but I prefer to just say the humans.
And what other realities did you see, like injuries, STIs, or mental health crises? Anything of the darker side?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, there was a high level of violence on set. I experienced injuries myself, so I have no doubt other people were being injured as well. Like what I always say with the porn, like the set I was trafficked on, it was like a whole world unto itself. I feel like the porn world's a whole different world, and probably each set is a slightly different world, but definitely the porn world is a different world. And so in that context, everything it's normalized, this high level of violence and sexual violence. And so it feels like if you're not on board with that you're what's wrong, right? That you're upside down rather than the world itself being upside down.
Were you given any creams to numb you or to take away the pain? I know in your book that you said that you had coping mechanisms where you numbed out and disassociated. So were they your coping strategies?
Yeah, they were definitely not for taking away. I mean, other than the alcohol they handed me, I think that's meant to kind of numb you a little bit. But other than that, they weren't about taking away pain. Actually, the set I was trafficked on, definitely a lot of what I would, the people producing it, I would definitely define as either psychopath or sociopath. And they enjoyed seeing the pain, right? They didn't want to take away the pain. Um, Maybe they wanted to make sure you got another scene in you, but they didn't. They didn't want to take away the pain. They wanted, and maybe it was like in my case, I always say I don't think I was a great actress, so they preferred to see the actual terror and fear as opposed to, and pain as opposed to an acted.
It's mind-boggling that people get pleasure out of people's suffering and pain like that. I mean, I just, I think porn has created a little bit of a rape culture, especially in the UK. We've got like 1 in 4 women over 16 that have been raped, and probably a lot under 16, because now what we're finding is that young people are the ones that are doing the abuse and the rape, because they're getting access, because of devices, they're getting access to porn a lot younger, sometimes as young as 6 or 7 years old, and that is being normalized, and
Yeah.
they're acting out stuff like that. It just is amazing. But what myths about porn do young people believe that ignore the trafficking, violence and exploitation behind it?
Yeah. I think that the main thing for young people, and also I think for adults, is that we connect to porn in a way similar to the way we connect to movies. And when we watch a movie, at the end of the movie, a lot of times you'll see this disclaimer: no animals were harmed in the filming of this movie. And I think we imply from that, rightly so, in mainstream movies, that no humans were harmed either, right? Um, and because porn has a similar format, right, the visual film format, we kind of assume that everybody goes home happy and unharmed, right? And with a lot more money in their pocket, right? And I think that there's a few things there that people don't understand the difference in porn. And like I said, most porn now is hardcore porn, which means that all the sex and violence is actual. So they don't understand that people are actually being harmed in that scene. And that there still is that aspect where they force you to smile at the end of a scene, right? Almost all my scenes would start with me looking cute and all put together, and would end with me looking destroyed, but with a big smile on my face, right? And people assume because that smile, everything's okay, but that's just a command performance, right? And so I really think it's important for people to understand that there are humans, first of all, on the other side of that screen, right? They're not just, they're human people with emotions, and that a lot of them are actually being harmed in the filming of that scene, which you can't really just tell from watching. You can't watch it and know if somebody was harmed or not. But if it's showing harm, likely they were harmed, right?
And because you were trafficked in, you never got any financial reward or any benefit for it. Wow.
No, it went to my father. So I do think that it's possible. When I was, at one point he did get me a car, which might have been bought with that money. I don't know, but that would be the only thing I received from it. He got all the money for it.
And coming to your exit and recovery journey, what turning point or support helped you to finally escape the industry, to get out?
Yeah, well, when I was being trafficked, there was a big turning point moment when they made me watch my first film. So in that moment, they took me into a screening room with a bunch of men. It was full of smoke and alcohol and guys, jacking off or whatever. So, but as they rolled the film, for the first time in my life, I saw my abuse up on the screen. I saw my abuse and trauma, and I had never seen that before. I would just live the experiences and then kind of disconnect from them to survive the rest of my world. So here it was in black and white up on the screen. Well, not black and white in color, but you know what I mean. It's up on the screen, and it was what I call a shattering light kind of moment, where I saw, first of all, how they were writing my story, right? How they were writing me as a character. And I just glimpsed that this wasn't going to end well if I didn't fight with everything I had for my continued breathing and really to for my humanity, right? To not just become a shell of a person, but to really continue to be a fully living human person. And so that was the moment that really pushed me into fight mode. And it would still take a couple years to get out. It's not like it was an automatic victorious exit, right? But it's what motivated me to get out.
I'm reading that chapter in your book, and you know that when you say you had to go to the back of the room and vomited, and it just all hit you what was actually happening to you. I can't imagine the emotions that you'd suppressed probably just all came up and out, and having to visually see that, it must have been so intense. And it must have been quite confusing that your father was now putting you onto a porn set for people to actually see what was happening to you as well. That must be, you must have had quite a few mental, like, mind wrecks with that.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot to unpack in that moment. I mean, part of it, I saw that, as I'm throwing up in the back corner, every time, like, well, I saw how they were, like, they had said they're gonna make me a star or whatever, right? That usual line that you hear from porn producers. Um, and but what I saw on the screen was me being humiliated, right? And I saw that the men in the room were more excited when I was humiliated, right? And so yeah, so there was that to unpack. There's also the recognition that now this is like forever on film, right? So it's not like I can just erase it from my memory and it's done, right? It's on film. Yeah, there were a lot of different things, and then how was I going to get away from them, from my father, like all that? Was there a way? All
And
that
so
is like,
what took you to the point of deciding to take your own life?
well, so spoiler alert here if you haven't read my book, but towards the end of my trafficking in porn, there was we'll just call it simulated snuff films, because obviously I didn't die, but we were filming simulated snuff scenes where they would just take me right to the edge of death. Like they would choke me or suffocate me or asphyxiate me or drown me while they were having sex with me. And they'd wait for that, like, I guess they'd hold it till you get that look of almost death in my eyes, and then they'd let go. So whether they were trying to get more scenes or, yeah, I'm not sure they were actually trying to kill me, but they were trying to simulate that kind of scenario. And so, but one thing that happened during that was, I guess you would call it a near-death experience or something, where I went to this, like, it felt like an African savanna or something. It was like wide open spaces and skies, and I felt peace and light, and like it stirred up hope within me again. Like, actually, I always, it sounds really weird, but I feel like trying to kill myself was almost a way to take control. It was almost yeah, I don't know, a reach for, yeah, that control. Like, I'm going to take control. So that required hope.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's the point at which that happened. And then if we're yeah, and so then what happened from that is that because it was a serious enough attempt, I was in a teen mental health unit for a month, and that was like the first time in a long time that I remember feeling safe.
Yeah.
I remember in that hospital, like, what is this feeling? And looking back on it, I was feeling safe. And but I knew that I was going to end up back in the hands of my father, which I did. He ended up pulling me out of the hospital, saying like I was manipulating everybody or something. And since they couldn't get a 2-doctor hold, because I was feeling safer, so I was less suicidal. So
yeah,
he was able to get me out of the hospital. But the fortunate thing that happened is that when I went back to the porn set, I don't know, they thought they were just kind of done with me then. they had decided maybe I was crazy or whatever. And also the fortunate thing, I always say there are fortunate and unfortunate things in our story. But the one fortunate thing about being trafficked in porn is that they are always looking for the new girl. And at some point, they are done with you. And so they were kind of done with me. And we filmed a final scene as an exit for my character. And then that was it. They didn't come for me anymore. And so I still had to escape from my father. But the porn trafficking was done at 17 in spring of my...
How did that last scene, how did that exit, that last scene feel?
Well, it was mixed actually, because you've been acclimated into this world, and so it was kind of the way I always describe it. If you've ever watched like martial arts movies, where like sometimes the swordsman is like exiled from the community and put outside the city, so it was that kind of scene. So in one sense, I felt almost the rejection of that scene, like I was being rejected from the world, even though I was trying to escape the world. But, in some sense, if even they rejected me, I wasn't sure what that meant about me. But then also I felt the freedom, right? Fortunately, it was spring of my senior year. And so my whole world on the outside had shifted into celebration of graduation. And so I got to kind of jump into that as if I had been a normal kid all along. And nobody knew what I was celebrating, but it was kind
Wow.
of a powerful, fun time.
You're really an amazing person that you were able to graduate and do all of that with all this horrific trauma and abuse
Yeah,
constantly going on. I mean, the levels, I just can't get my head around, because I mean, I've been through sexual abuse, and compared to yours, not nothing really, but the way it impacted me, it destroyed so much of my life. So that you were able to still do all of this other stuff, you're
yeah.
amazing.
I started most days in high school, which is where when the porn trafficking was happening. I started most days in high school with like 2 to 4 Vivarin, which is caffeine pills, etc., to kill the pain, and like a Diet Coke and a Twix bar. I mean, that was kind of like, you needed the sugar, I needed the caffeine, so
Yeah.
that's kind of how I survived.
And I bet there was a lot of pain to take away on not just physical, but emotional and mental as
Yeah,
well.
I
Yeah.
spent my classes writing. Like, I'd pretend I was taking notes, but I would be journaling, really.
Yeah. So you've shared so much in your book, but how has writing it been part of your healing? And how long has recovery taken? And what ongoing challenges do survivors like you face?
Yeah. Well, I started writing when I was 15, actually in the middle of the trafficking. Poetry was my first emotional language. I didn't really have any kind of grid for emotions because I was never really allowed them in my life. And so I still tend to define emotions in poetic terms, like I'm like, a storm is coming in, or, there are open skies ahead. And so, yeah, poetry became my first emotional language because I didn't even have to understand what I was writing. I just knew it was right. Like, I could write about storms or crashing into the rocks, um, or blackberry vines wrapped around my arms, and I couldn't have defined exactly what that meant, but I understood it was true for what I was experiencing. Yeah, and so I wrote ever since then. It was funny, actually, how I started writing. Somebody gave me this rainbow journal, which was hilarious because at the time I was, there wasn't really goth in my high school, but basically I was very goth, right, in how I was living my life and how my life felt. And so I thought this rainbow journal was ridiculous, but something about the pages drew me. And that's what started me writing. And I've been writing it ever since. I always say I write to see, that as I write, I see what's true inside me and around me. And so that's really what my book was like too. I've done years of talk therapy, but actually the therapist I was seeing left, like she moved just before I started writing my book. And I tried to find another one, but nothing was a fit. And so I just felt like, let's just end this like we started this. So really writing my book became like this next stage of healing. And that's why it took me 5.5 years to write, because every revision was a layer of healing. And when I started writing it, the first revision, there was a lot of kind of how like the porn producers had written me, right? That was on the page. So it wasn't my eyes, it was their eyes seeing me. And so each revision, I kind of stripped more of that off. And I knew it was done when the story and myself was depicted through my eyes. And I think, so that's about writing. And then you were asking, yeah, about the healing process itself. It's a long, really long journey. I mean, I went in and out of healing for decades, right? It's not continuous, right? Because part of healing is learning to live again. And so there were whole periods of time where I wasn't doing the deep dive into like counseling and into the past trauma. But those times are just as important in the healing process. And that's part of why it's taken a long time, is you can't just power through. And I remember at one point when I started doing counseling for the trafficking trauma, somebody asked me, well, you've been doing it for 6 months now. Are you almost done? And I just laughed at them. I'm like, no, we're just establishing trust at this point. We haven't even got to the content yet.
Yeah. I mean, I know from my own personal journey, it's taken me 37 years of working on layers of the trauma, and I call it the eternal onion. There's always layers, so I can't imagine how, you know,
well, if you think about like however long the trauma was, it's going to take at least that long to unpack it, but probably more, because, you know, especially when it's at like a primary stage of development and all that, it just takes a long time to.
And has it stopped you from having relationships?
No, I don't have a significant other in my life. That's my own choice. Like, I don't really think I think I knew when I got away that I would never get married, on some level. Like, I also was always surviving socially, so for a long time I would always pretend that I liked a guy that I knew I was unattainable because I didn't really want to get him, you know. But I have a lot of relationships. I have adopted friends who are like family, is what I call them. And so I really feel full in that way. I don't feel like I'm missing something. So
good. So, drawing from your experiences and advocacy, what is your most important message for young people about porn and its real world harms?
Well, I think the most important message I would say is that know that there are humans on the other side of that screen, and that you can't tell from watching it what their degree of harm that they're experiencing, and or even their age sometimes. I know that there's the whole trend of barely legal porn where you make older people look younger, but in my case they made me look older. And so you just can't tell from on a screen how old somebody is in what you're watching.
So how can parents, educators and society better teach our youth to spot signs of exploitation in porn and online content?
Well, here's what I would say. First of all, we have to know that trafficking and exploitation in porn looks a lot different than trafficking and exploitation in prostitution. So grooming looks different as well. And so what I would focus on with porn is the fraud that is so prevalent in the recruiting stage, right? So know that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If you show up on a what's supposed to be a clothed model shoot and it's a porn shoot, leave. Because if they lied to you once, that trend is going to continue. And also know that most people think that everybody in porn makes a lot of money. And that is especially not true now, where there's so much amateur porn out there. But just know that porn producers they use the fact that you're not making much money to get you to do the sex acts you don't want to do, right? They'll offer you more money for the sex acts you don't want to do that include significant harm to yourself. So those are the important things to know, you know, on the front side going into porn.
And do you think there are any changes that could be seen in the industry or laws to protect young vulnerable people. I know Exodus Cry and Lila Mithilthwaite have been doing a lot of work, haven't they? And there was something in the Supreme Court recently.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening on the porn consumer side of it, like to protect minors,
Yeah.
right? So we're getting those laws passed in a lot of states that requires the porn sites to get the age of the person that is logging on.
I know in Louisiana when they did that, 80 porn use went down by about 80%, but dark web activity went up. And in the UK, when they launched the Online Safety Act in July this year, the VPN use went right off the Richter scale because our young people are so tech savvy, and I'm totally with safety. I think that's really, really important. But I do believe that it needs to be a two-pronged effect of safety and education, so that they're aware of all these things that they weren't aware of.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I say to people, you know, it's estimated that about 50% of the porn industry is human and sex trafficking, they're like, what?
Yeah.
They have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that education is so important. And really when I say education too, I mean connection, right? We need to really every atrocity in the world happens in disconnection from shared humanity, right? And that's true in the porn exploitation and trafficking as well, is that there's that disconnect from this is a human I'm watching on this screen. And so the more we connect people to there are humans in porn being harmed, right? That seems very basic, but it's what really people need to know the most, right?
Yeah. And like the series you mentioned earlier, the Exodus Christ series and the hardcore film, you know, for some porn actors, their goal is to destroy and break women. And people aren't aware of that either. So, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be exposed.
Yeah.
So if a young person is being groomed or considering the industry, I think you've really covered this really, but is there anything else that you think they should know?
Yeah, I the one thing I wanted to bring out that I haven't said yet is that what you should know is that the really powerful force or dynamic on a porn set is this sense that it's you against the whole crowd, that whole set, right? And that is a powerful force that I cannot that you cannot underestimate, right? No matter how strong you think you are, when you feel like you are standing against this whole group of people, it's pretty hard not to crumble, right? And so I think we tend to think of it like it's just a business that, you sign a contract and everything. I don't know, like it's non-emotional, but there's this when you come on set and the producer says, "Hey, I know you agreed to this, but we're going to change it up. And if you don't do it, then everybody else on set is out of work." Right? That's a hard, it's a hard thing to say no to, right? And in my case, when I chose to fight, still I just felt like it's just me against this whole set of people. And so I sometimes that meant I couldn't get no out of my mouth. Sometimes that meant when I said no, it's like almost like it was erased and not heard. And sometimes when I said no, it actually excited them and meant like go. I always say that no meant go, right? It's that excitement of overpowering somebody who's resisting you.
Yeah.
So I think that you can't underestimate that dynamic when you're considering.
And I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about teaching young people is understanding all the different trauma responses, especially when it comes to consent, that you have to get permission first, or you can go into the other person can go into a freeze response, or if they've had past trauma, they might be going into a fawning response and they won't have the ability to say no. And I know that must be highlighted even more on a porn set because the amount of trauma and stuff that's going on and the pressure that's on top of you. But yeah, I think there is so many different trauma responses that young people need to be aware of. It's interesting to hear you bring those up with.
Yeah, there's a big discussion around consent we need to have. I think it's been defined. It's been defined in the courts, right? But also we have to consider that the courts historically were made up of men who are trying to protect each other, right? And so there's this very narrow sense of consent that we consider that, in the context of domestic violence or other violent relationships, like you're saying, there's a lot of complexity about how we determine consent. And so we need to rehab that discussion as a culture.
Yeah. And trauma bonding and things like that. I mean, I
Yeah.
was recently watching the Sean Combs Netflix, and the last episode where the juror was saying that, oh, she kept going back to him. They were in a relationship. If it was bad, she'd have left. And I was just like, I was screaming at the TV, like, trauma bonding. How
Yeah.
can you have a juror that's not trauma informed? And
Yeah.
yeah, it was mind blowing to me. And this, in 2025, the amount
Yeah.
of research and stuff we know about trauma, and that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So, what would you say was your most important message you want listeners, especially the young people and porn consumers, to take away from your story?
Well, that there are humans being trafficked in porn, right? We aren't, the conversation about trafficking in porn is just beginning, right? We talk a lot about how porn creates trafficking, but we don't necessarily talk about the trafficking in porn that's
Yeah.
happening. And I was a minor, age 14 to 17 when I was being trafficked. So that means you didn't have to establish coercion or force to define it as trafficking. You just had to have the paid sex act, right? And the fact I was a minor, that's what constitutes trafficking. But I was being trafficked alongside adults. And the level of force and coercion happening on set, even without the fraud we discussed on the recruiting side earlier, would lead me to believe that many of the adults on set could have been defined as trafficking victims as well. And so there's a much higher volume of trafficking in porn than we are now discussing. And that's
Yeah.
really important for people to know.
And was anybody held accountable for what happened to you?
No, in my case, I was so kind of destroyed for a long time. It took a long time to rebuild. And by the time I had rebuilt enough where I could have possibly testified, it was way past the most statutes of limitations.
So, in your view, what are the biggest things people should be aware of about the porn industry that aren't obvious from just watching it?
Well, I think one, that there are dynamics on a porn set that make trafficking possible and actually more likely than we know. And that we need to remember that there are humans in porn. That's number two. And third, that we need to consider consent kind of separate. We kind of got to separate it from that sexual dynamic. And there's something about when it comes to sex that we define consent differently than we do in any other category. I think because people want porn to have pleasure, right? They're willing to kind of let things slide that they wouldn't in other areas, right? There are human rights for the people in porn, and we have to see them as human for that. And then we have to realize that they have rights and that consent shouldn't be used to erase abuse or harm.
Yeah. And do you think that consumption of porn fuels demand for more extreme content and more trafficking or exploitation?
Yeah, from what I've read and watched, I would agree with that. Obviously my story wasn't consumption, so I don't know from the inside out.
Yeah. I mean, from what you've shared, your journey went from quite demeaning stuff to more and more, and then getting to the kind
so
of...
it was always escalating in that same progression you're talking about. So I would think that porn use works the same way. And from what I've read, it does, that people are not happy with, they start with a very vanilla like porn, right? And then they move to more violence and more violence.
Yeah. And I've heard all sorts of stories from addicts and some of the dark roads they've gone down.
Yeah.
But over your years of speaking out and writing your book, coming of age on a porn set, Trafficked in Porn at 40, porn users, addicts, or everyday consumers approached you to share how porn has negatively impacted their lives?
Yeah, I've had some very powerful interactions with people I now consider friends, that have talked to me about their porn use. And I think what was so powerful about our interactions is that we were each able to kind of share our pain and connect with each other's humanity, not just, leave each other in our stereotypes, but really connect with the humanity in each other.
Because sexual energy feels good.
Yeah,
That's the thing. But it can be used in a really positive way to empower and to heal and to grow and to expand, or it can be used to destroy. And unfortunately, Jewel, you were on the destruction end of sexual energy. But when young people view it, it activates their sexual energy. They feel good, but they're being shown confusing images that is
yeah.
distorting their minds into what is healthy and what's unhealthy. So what stories have they shared with you? But has it affected their relationships or mental health or
Yeah.
any realizations?
Yeah, the way I would describe it is this. If you've ever seen like cartoons or movies where where a person is pulled into the screen they're watching, like a TV screen or video screen, I feel like the stories they've told me are like that. It feels like they were pulled into this video screen and they lost years of their life sometimes. And that now they're rebuilding that kind of the lost years, so to speak. And there's a lot that they lost in that time, their sense of self and really a life in a sense. It's almost like they were pulled into this screen and just lost life in that time. And so now they're rebuilding their lives. So it's really encouraging to see them doing the work of healing and rebuilding their lives.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or words of encouragement for any other survivors that might be listening or anyone inspired by your journey to make a difference? And also, where can listeners learn more about your work or get hold of your book?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the second question. My website is Jewell with two L's, Jewell, Baraka, BARAKA.com. And from there, you can get connected to my social media as well as my book. And my book is on Amazon. It's in Kindle, Audible, and on paperback. So you can get that there. And what I would really like to say to other survivors out there is, yes, we want to hear your stories, but also I would say take your time and heal well before you release it to the world, right? I feel like when we tell our stories, we have to understand that we should start with small circles of safe people and expand outward from there and only go as far as your healing allows, right? So at certain points in my healing, I was able to talk about my suicide attempt, but not my abuse. And then I was able to talk about my family violence and abuse much long before I was able to talk about my trafficking. So just allow yourself that process of healing and strengthening and speaking to the world when you're ready, right? Speak to people close to you, therapists first, and then when you're ready, speak it to the world. But the world will wait for your story. Your healing is more important than the advocacy. I mean, advocacy is important, but in the right time.
Thank you for sharing your voice with us and with all the young people that need to hear this message, Jewel.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh.